icy wind blew in violent gusts, but we marched without faltering. The SS made us increase our pace. Faster, you swine, you filthy sons of blank. Why not? The movement warmed us up a little. The blood flowed more easily in our veins. One felt oneself reviving. Faster, you filthy sons of blanks. We were no longer marching, we were running, like autonomous. The SS were running too, their weapons in their hands. We looked as though we were fleeing before them. Pitch darkness, every now and then, an explosion in the night. They had orders to fire at anyone who could not keep up. Their fingers on the triggers, they did not deprive themselves of the pleasure. If one of us stopped for a second, a sharp shot fired off another filthy sons of blame. I was putting one foot in front of the other mechanically. I was dragging with me this skeletal body which weighed so much. If only I could not get rid of it. I got spit of my efforts not to think about it. I could feel myself as two entities, my body and me. I hated it. I repeated to myself, don't drink, don't think, don't stop, run. Near me, men were collapsing in the dirty snow. Shots. At my side marched a young Polish lad called Zalman. He had been working in the electrical warehouse at Buna. They had laughed at him because he was always praying or meditating on some problem of the Talmud. It was his way of escaping from reality and not feeling the blows. He was suddenly seized with a cramp in the stomach. I've got a stomach ache, he whispered to me. He could not go on. He had to stop for a moment. I begged him, wait a bit, Zalman. We shall all be stopping soon. We're not going to run like this to the end of the world. But as he ran, he began to undo his buttons, crying, I can't go any longer. My stomach's bursting. Make an effort, Zalman. Try. I can't, he groaned. His trousers lowered. He then let himself sink down. This was the last picture of heaven. I do not think it can have been the SSS who finished him, because no one had noticed. He must have been trampled to death beneath the feet of the thousands of men who followed us. Quickly forgot him. I began to think of myself again because of my painful foot. A shudder went through me at each step. A few more yards, I thought, a few more yards. And that end will be it. I shall fall. A spurt of red flame, a shot. Death wrapped itself around me till I was stifled. I stuck to me. I felt that I could not touch it. The idea of dying, of no longer being, began to fascinate me. Not to exist any longer, not to feel the horrible pains in my foot, not to feel anything, neither weariness, nor cold, nor anything. To break the ranks, to let oneself slide to the edge of the road. My father's presence was the only thing that stopped me. He was running at my side, out of breath, and at the end of his strength, at his wit end. I had no right to let myself die. What would he do without me? I was his only support. These thoughts had taken up a brief space of time, during which I had gone on running without feeling my throbbing foot, without realizing that I was running, without being conscious that I owned a body, galloping there on the road in the midst of so many thousands of others. When I came to myself again, I tried to slacken the pace, but there was no way. A great tidal wave of men came rolling onward and would have crushed me like an ant. I was simply walking in my sleep. I managed to close my eyes and to run like that while asleep. Now and then someone would push me violently from behind and I would wake up. The other would shout, run faster. If you don't want to go on, let the other people come past. All I had to do was to close my eyes for a second and see the whole world passing by, to dream a whole lifetime. An endless road, letting oneself be pushed by the mob, letting oneself be dragged along by the blind destiny. When the became tired, they were changed. But no one changed us. Our limbs numb, the cold despite the running, our throats parched, famished, breathless, and went on. We were masters of nature, masters of the world. We had forgotten everything, death, fatigue, our natural seeds, stronger than cold or hunger, stronger than these shots and the desire to die. Condemned and wondered, mere numbers were the only men on earth. At last, the morning star appeared in this gray sky. A trail of indeterminate light showed on the horizon. We were exhausted. We were without strength, without illusions. The commandant announced that we had already covered 40 miles since we left. 42 miles since we left. It was a long time since I had passed beyond the limits of fatigue. Our legs were moving mechanically, in spite of us, without us. We went, though, and deserted village. Not a living soul, not a bark of a dog, house of gaping windows. A few slipped out the ranks to try and hide in some deserted building. Still, 1 hour marching more, and the last came the order to rest. We sank down as one of the men into the snow. My father shook me. Not here. Get up. A little further. There's a shed over there. Come on. I had neither the will nor the strength to get up. Nonetheless, I obeyed. It was not a shed, but a brick factory with a caved-in roof, broken windows, walls filthy with soot. I was not easily to get in. Hundreds of prisoners were crawling at the door. We at last succeeded in getting inside. There, too, the snow was thick. I let myself sink down. I was only then that I felt my weariness. The snow was like a carpet, very gentle, very warm. I fell asleep. I did not know how long I slept, a few moments, an hour. When I woke up, a frozen hand was patting my cheeks. I forced myself to open my eyes. It was my father. How old he had grown since the night before. His body was completely twisted, up into itself. His eyes were petrified, his lips withered, decayed. Everything about him bore witness to extreme exhaustion. His voice was damped with tears and snow. Don't let yourself be overcome by sleep, Eliezer. It's dangerous to fall asleep in the snow. You might sleep for good. Come on, come on. Get up. Get up? How could I? How could I get myself out of this fluffy bed? I could not hear what my father said, but it seemed empty of meaning, as though he had told me to lift up the whole building in my arms. Come on, son, come on. I got up, gritting my teeth, supporting me with his arm. He led me outside. I was far more easy. I was more difficult to go out and to get in. Under our feet were men crushed, trampled underfoot, dying. No one paid attention. We were outside. The icy wind stung my face. I bit my lips continuously to prevent them from freezing. Around me, everything was dancing, a dancing of death. It made my head reel. I was walking in a cemetery among stifled corpses, logs of wood, not a cry of distance, not a groan, nothing but a mass of agony and silence. No one asked anyone else for help. You died because you had to die. There was no fuss. In everything, stifled corpses, I saw myself, and soon I should not have been able to see them. I should be one of them. A matter of hours. Come on, father. Let's go back to the shed. He did not answer. He was looking at the dead. The other. Come on, father. It's better to go over now. We can die out here for a bit after one another. I'll watch you over, then you can watch me over. We won't want we don't want to let each other fall asleep. We'll look after one another. He agreed. Trampling over living bodies and corpses, we managed to re-enter the shed. Here we let ourselves sink down. Don't be afraid, son. Sleep. You can sleep. I'll look after you myself. No, you first, father. Go to sleep. He refused. I lay down and tried to force myself to sleep, to doze a little, but in vain. God knows what I would not have given for those few moments of sleep. But deep down, I felt to go to sleep would mean to die, and something within me revolted against this death. All around me, death was moving in silence. Silently, without violence, I would seize upon sleeping being, enter to him, and consume him bit by bit. Next to me there was someone trying to wake up his neighbor, his brother perhaps, or a friend. In vain, disencouraged in the attempt, the man lay down in his turn next to the corpses and slept too. Who was there to wake him up? Stretching out an arm, I touched him. Wake up, you mustn't sleep here. Half open eyes, no advice, he said in the faint voice. I'm tired, leave me alone, leave me. My father, too, was gently dozing. I could not see his eyes. He kept had falling over his face. Wake up, I whispered in his ear. He startled up. He sat up and looked around. Bewildered, stiffered, or a bereft stare. He stared all around in circles, as though he suddenly decided to draw up an inventory of his uniforms to find exactly where he was, in what place, and why. Then he smiled. I shall always remember that smile. From which world did it come? The snow continued to fall in thick flakes over the corpses. The door of the shed opened. An old man appeared, his mustache covered with frost on his lips cold. It was Rabbi Eliudi, the rabbi of a small Polish community. He was a very good man, well beloved by everyone in the camp, even by the capos and the heads of the blocks. Despite the trails of the privations, his face still shone with the inner purity. He was the only rabbi who was always addressed as Rabbi at Buna. He was like one of the old prophets, always in the midst of the people to comfort them. And strangely, his words of comfort never provoked rebellion. They really brought peace. He came into the shed and his eyes brightened than ever, seemed to be looking for someone, perhaps someone he has been seen somewhere. He had lost his son in the crowd. He had looked over in vain among the dying. Then he had scratched up the snow to his corpus without result. For 3 years they had stuck together, always near each other for forever, and for the blows from the ration of bread for a praise. 3 years from camp to camp, from selection to selection, and now, when the end seemed near, fate had separated him, finding himself near me. Rabbi Eliezer whispered, it happened on the road. We lost sight of one another. During the journey, I had stayed a little to the rear of the column. I hadn't any strength left for running. My son didn't notice. That's all I know. That's where he disappeared. Where can I find him? Perhaps you've seen him somewhere. No, Rabbi Elior. I haven't seen him. He left then as he had come, like the windswept shadow. He had already passed through the door when I suddenly remembered seeing his son running by my side. I had forgotten that, and I didn't tell him, Rabbi. Then I remembered something else. His son had seen him losing a ram, limping, straggling back near the column. He had seen him, and he had continued to run in front of him, letting him in the distance between now greater. A terrible thought loomed up in my head. He had wanted to get rid of his father. He had felt that his father was growing weak, and he believed that at the end was near and saw the separation and was to get rid of the burden, to free himself from the encumbrance which could lessen his own chances of survival. I had done well not to forget them, and I was glad that Rabbi should continue to look for his beloved son. And in spite of myself, a prayer rose in my heart to that God in whom I no longer believed in. My Father, my Lord, the universe, give me strength, never do what Rabbi Elias' son has done. Shouts rose outside in the yard where darkness had fallen. The SS ordered the ranks to form up. Then march began again. The dead stayed in the yard, under the snow, like faithful guards, assassinated without burial. No one had the prayer for the dead over them. Sons have abandoned their fathers' remains without tear. On the way it snowed, and it snowed endlessly. We were marching more slowly. The guards themselves seemed tired. My wounded foot no longer hurt me. It must have been completely frozen. The food we lost to me. It had detached itself from my body like a wheel of a cart. Too bad. I should have had my reasoning to myself. I could live with only one leg. The main thing was not to think about it. Above all, not at the moment. Leave those thoughts for later. Our march had last semblance of disciplines. We went as we wanted, as we could. We heard no more shots. Our guards must have been tired. But deep death scarcely needed any help for them. The cold was conscientiously doing its work. At every step, someone fell and suffered no more. From time to time, SS officers on motorcycles would go down the length of the Congo and try to shake us out of any growing apathy. Keep going. We're getting there. Courage. Only a few more hours. We're reaching Bluates. These words of encouragement, even though they were nearly came from months of our assassination, did us a great deal of good. No one wanted to give up now. Just before the end, so near the goal, our eyes searched for the horizon, for the barbed wire Gliwice. Our only desire was to reach as quickly as possible. The night had now set in. The snow had ceased to fall. We walked for several more hours before arriving. We did not notice the camp until we were just in front of the gate. Some capos rapidly installed us in the barracks. We pushed and jostled one another as if we were supreme refuge. The gateway to life. We walked over pain-racked bodies. We trod on wounded fences. No cries, a few groans. My father and I were ourselves thrown into the ground by the rolling tide. Beneath our feet, someone let out a rattling cry. You crushed me, mercy! A voice that was not unknown to me. You're crushing me, mercy, mercy! The same faint voice, the same rattle, heard somewhere before. That voice had spoken to me one day. Where? When? Years ago? No, it could not have only been at the camp. Mercy! I felt I was crushing him. I was stopping his breath. I wanted to get up. I struggled to disengage myself so that he could breathe, but I was crushed myself beneath the weight of other bodies. I could hardly breathe. I dug my nails into the unknown faces. I was bittering all around me in order to get air. No one cried out. Suddenly I remembered Juliet, the boy from Warsaw who played the violin at the band Buna. Juliet, is that you? Eliezer, the 25 strokes of whips. Yes, I remember. He was silent. A long moment he laughed. Juliet, can you hear me? Juliet, yes, he said in a feeble voice. What do you want? He was not dead. How do you feel, Juliet? I asked, less to know that the answer to hear was that he could speak, that he was alive. All right, Eliezer, I'm getting all right. Hardly any air. Worn out. My feet are swollen. It's good to rest, but my violin. I thought he had gone out of his mind. What use was the violin here? What, your violin? He gasped. I'm afraid that they'll break my violin. I brought it with me. I could not answer him. Someone was lying full length on top of me, covering my face. I was unable to breathe through the earth, either mouth or nose. Sweat beading my brow, ran down my spine. This was the end of the road, a silent death, suffocation, no way of crying out, a calling for help. I tried to get rid of the invisible assassins. My whole will to live centered in my nails. I scratched, I battled for a mouthful of air. I tore at decaying flesh, which did not respond. I could not free myself from this mass weighing down my chest. Was this the end of me struggling against? Who knows? I shall never know. All I can say is that I won. I succeeded in digging a hole through this wall of dying people, a little hole through which I could drink in a small quantity of air. Father, how are you? I asked as soon as I could utter a word. I knew he could not be far from me. Well, answered a distant voice which seemed to come from another world. I tried to sleep. He tried to sleep. Was he right or wrong? Could he even sleep here? Was it not dangerous to allow our vigilance to fail, even for a moment, when at any minute death could pronounce upon you? I was thinking of this when I heard the sounds of a violin. The sound of a violin in this dark shed where the dead heaped in the living. What madman could be playing a violin here, at the brink of his own grave? Or was it really a hallucination? It must have been Juliet. He played a fragment of Beethoven's concerto. I had never heard sound so pure in such a silence. How had he managed to free himself, to draw his body from under mine without mine me being even aware of it? It was pitch dark. I could only hear the violin, and I was as though Juliet's soul on the bow. He was playing his life. The whole of his life was gliding through the strings. His hopes, his cherished past, his extinguishing future. He played as he would never play again. We shall never forget Juliet. How could I forget that concert, given to an audience of dying dead men? To this day, whenever I hear Beethoven played in my eyes, I close my eyes, and out of the dark rises the sad pale of the face of the Polish friend, as he said farewell in his violin to an audience of dying men. I do not know for how long he played. I was overcome by sleep. When I awoke in the daylight, I could see Juliet opposite of me, slumbered over, dead. Near him lay his violin, smashed, trampled, a strange, overwhelming little corpse. We stayed at Gliwice for 3 days. 3 days after, without food or drink, we were not allowed to leave the barracks. The SS men guarded the door. I was hungry and thirsty. I must have been very dirty and exhausted, to judge from the appearance of others. The bread we had brought, from Buna had long since been devoured. And now, and who knew when we would be given another ration? The front was following us. We could hear new gunshots and air very close. But when neither of us got the strength or the courage to believe that the Nazis would have no time to evacuate us, and that the Russians would soon be here. We heard that they were going to be deported into the center of Germany. On the third day at dawn, we were driven out of the barracks. We all threw blankets all over our shoulders like prayer halls. We were directed toward the gate and divided into the camp into two. A group of SS officers were standing there. A rumor ran through the ranks of the selection. The SS officers did the selection. The weak to the left, those that could walk well to the right. My father was sent to the left. I ran after him. An SS officer shouted at my back, "Come back!" I slipped in among the others. Several S's rushed to bring me back, creating such a confusion that many of the people from the left were able to come back to the right, and among them my father and myself. However, there were some shots and some dead. We were all made to leave the camp. After half an hour marching, we arrived right in the middle of the field, divided by rails. We had to wait for the train to arrive. The snow fell quickly. We were forbidden to sit down or even to move. The snow began to form thick over our blankets. They brought us bread, the usual ration. We threw ourselves upon it. Someone had the idea of appeasing his thirst by eating the snow. Soon the others were imitating him. As we were not allowed to bend down, everyone looked out the spoon of the accumulated snow of its neighbor's bag. A mouthful of bread and a mouthful of snow. The S's were now watching and laughed at us through this spectacle. Hours went by. Our eyes grew weary of scoring of the horizon of the liberating train. I did not arrive until much later in this evening. An infirmary long train composed of cattle wagons with no roofs, the S's pushed us in, 100 to a carriage. We were so thin, our embarkation completed, the convoy set out.